What was the best moment you've seen where the real world hit a spoiled rich kid? I grew up poor in a rich neighborhood. Not that we can only afford one vacation a year kind of poor. I'm talking about the kind of poor where your stomach grumbles through lunch, and you pretend it's by choice. The kind where your mom works 2 jobs just to keep the lights on and still has to decide between paying the rent or the electric bill. Now imagine trying to go through a prestigious high school with those conditions. That was my life. Then there was this kid, Brad. He was everything I wasn't: rich, popular, and spoiled. But Brad had a problem. He was cruel, and he was a rich, spoiled kid. Brad isn't happy with just having money. He had to flaunt it too. His clothes were designer, his car was the latest Maserati, and his ego was through the roof. And Brad loved to make people like me feel small. He picked you apart, always looking for something you were insecure about, and making sure everyone knew. And he used it on me when he found out I was poor. Every day while I walked to school he would spit on me and say maybe one day you can work for my dad and afford a bus pass. I took it though because I really didn't want to escalate the situation. And though I hated Brad, his insults eventually got old and I stopped caring about what he said because I knew that his actions would come to bite him in the future. Instead, I started focusing on my future, and what I could do to never have to endure what Brad did to me. So, while Brad was busy banging chicks and partying, I got a part-time job working for Brad's grandfather, Mr. Harrison. Mr. Harrison had made his fortune from scratch, and now controlled most of the industries in our town. He didn't inherit anything, and though Brad was his descendant, I admired him. My job was to help Mr. Harrison with everything he needed. His health had been declining for years, so by the time I started he needed round-the-clock care. The job wasn't glamorous, just helping him with meals, medication, and general care and taking care of the estate. His family didn't visit much. They only showed up when they wanted money or favors. Brad, especially, couldn't care less about his grandfather's condition. But after a couple of months Brad found out I was working for his grandfather, and he took advantage. He started posting pictures of me helping his grandfather with captions like, "If you are looking for anyone to wipe your grandfather's butt, here he is. That's all he will be good for anyways." Then he would tell me that I was wiping his grandfather's butt, while he was going to be inheriting his wealth. I just ignored him since I needed the money, and I liked working for Mr. Harrison. He wasn't like the rest of his family. Despite his wealth, he was down to earth. Sure, he had the big house, the luxury cars and all the signs of wealth, but he didn't flaunt it the way Brad did. In fact, the more I worked for him, the more I realized his wealth didn't make him happy, and he was very lonely. Through the time I spent with him I didn't expect was how close I'd become with Mr. Harrison. It started small, just casual conversations while I worked. He'd ask about school, about my plans for the future. But one day he suddenly asked, "What is your biggest dream, kid?" I told him I didn't know. Not because I didn't have dreams, but because dreams felt so far away. But he kept asking and eventually I opened up. I told him how I was teaching myself to code in my free time, and how I was learning about investing because I didn't want to be stuck in the same cycle of poverty my family had always been in. I wanted more for my future. I even told him how I was starting to make some extra money online, about $1,000 a month. He listened to me and said he was proud of me, and that in no time I would make something of myself. Then one afternoon as I was wrapping up for the day, Mr. Harrison sat me down and told me something that I'll never forget. "You know, my family, they don't talk to me unless they need money. They only see me as a checkbook. It's lonely. I spent my whole life building something, but the people closest to me only care about my money and not me. I wish they had the ambition you do. You're doing it the right way by learning and building something for yourself." I didn't know what to say. It felt weird hearing that from a man who had everything, but it stuck with me. Then it all came crashing down when Mr. Harrison had a heart attack a week later. It was sudden, and despite the doctor's best efforts he didn't make it. His death hit me harder than I expected. He'd become something of a mentor to me and now he was gone. Then I got a call from a lawyer a week after the funeral. He told me that Mr. Harrison had included me in his will. I thought maybe it was a small gesture like a watch, a token of appreciation. But when I arrived at the lawyer's office, everything changed. Everyone in Mr. Harrison's family was there, including Brad. And then the lawyer began reading through the usual stuff like property, assets, trust funds, until he got to the end which said to Stephen, "This was my name but I changed it so I don't reveal it online. I leave my entire estate, including all financial assets and property, as I believe he will honor my legacy and manage it better than anyone in my family." The room went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Brad's face went pale, then red with rage. He kept saying how this had to be a mistake and that his grandpa hadn't left everything to me. But it wasn't a mistake and Brad was left with nothing. For a moment, I was in shock and I couldn't believe it. I went from the poor kid who used to scrape toilets to survive to the heir of a fortune worth millions. Brad had spent his whole life looking down on the people below him, and now he was the poor one. But I wasn't like Brad. I looked at that fortune and realized I didn't want it. It didn't feel right. I didn't want to become what Mr. Harrison had warned me about and I didn't want to be like Brad. I wanted to build my own path, so I donated every last cent. I set up a charity in Mr. Harrison's name, one that would help kids like me, who grew up with nothing but dreams and the determination to make something of themselves. Luckily in the past 2 years, I've used everything I learned from Mr. Harrison and the online courses like coding, investing and hustling to make more money. I'm making $5,000 a month now at 20 years old. As for Brad, well, he's not doing so well. Turns out, when you've never worked a day in your life and you lose your safety net, the world's a tough place. Last I heard, he's living with some relatives, and working at the local Arby's in our town. Edit. A lot of you are asking what I did to make this money. Well, I take a copywriting job for an e-commerce company which pays me $4,000 a month, and I invest with Bloom Learn to Invest which makes me $1,000 a month passively. I would recommend this for anyone who wants to make some extra money on the side since you get paid for learning to invest. Soon though I'll be starting a job at Google and my salary will be well over $8,000 a month.